She thought he was just poor and helpless. Every day she brought him food without expecting anything in return. But one day he disappeared, and when he came back, he was completely different. Who was he really? Subscribe and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to know. The morning sun had only just begun to stretch its pale fingers across the sleepy streets of Fairhope, a small southern town where everyone seemed to know everyone and nothing ever changed, at least not on the surface. A cool mist hovered over the cracked pavement as cars trickled in and out of the town's only supermarket parking lot. The air was thick with the scent of dew, asphalt, and the faint aroma of cinnamon rolls from the bakery across the road. On the edge of the supermarket's entrance, where the tiled floor met the stained concrete, sat a figure so motionless and thin that he almost blended into the shadows. His wheelchair creaked slightly every time he shifted his bony weight, and the tattered blanket over his legs did little to hide the emaciation of his frame. He was a skeleton wrapped in skin, hollowed out by time and hardship. His name, though no one bothered to ask, was Malcolm. But around here they had other names for him, if they acknowledged him at all. "Look at that bag of bones," one teenager snickered, nudging his friend as they exited the store with bags of chips and energy drinks. The friend made a face and mockingly pinched his nose. "Smells like death." Another passerby, an older woman in a beige church hat, clutched her purse tighter and stepped widely around him. "This is what happens when people stop trying," she muttered, loud enough for Malcolm to hear. He didn't respond. He never did. He sat in silence, a phantom observer at the intersection of apathy and routine. His eyes, deep-set and rimmed with fatigue, scanned the faces that passed, each one etched with indifference, some with disdain. No one looked him in the eye for more than a second. His presence was a blemish on the town's carefully polished surface, a reminder of something uncomfortable, something they'd rather not see. His wheelchair was an antique of suffering. Rusted spokes, one wheel permanently tilted at a slant, the seat fraying at the edges. A faded cushion, probably salvaged from a church basement or old couch, offered little comfort. Malcolm's clothes hung off him like sacks, an oversized army green jacket with ripped cuffs, a shirt with buttons long since gone, pants held together by safety pins. His shoes didn't match. One was a man's boot, the other a cracked sneaker held together with electrical tape. And yet he never begged. His hands never stretched out. His voice was never raised. He never called after people or rattled a cup. He simply sat each day from morning until late afternoon like a statue anchored in grief. Those who worked nearby grew used to his presence. A young cashier named Casey once called the manager to complain. "It's bad for business. He scares people." The manager sighed and called the police, who came and asked Malcolm to move. He did, for a day. Then he came back, positioning himself just far enough from the entrance to avoid legal action, but close enough to be seen, if anyone chose to look. But no one did. Malcolm listened more than he spoke. From his place at the edge of society, he heard the town's pulse, the gossip, the murmurs, the ugly truths disguised behind polite smiles. He listened to a woman berate her child for talking too loudly. He heard a couple argue over hidden purchases. He watched the subtle nods between neighbors that meant, "We're better than him." And through it all, he remained silent, studying them. Each day, as the sun climbed and the shadows shifted, he noted who walked by and how they reacted. Some crossed to the other side of the lot. Others quickened their pace. Children asked questions and were hushed immediately. "Don't stare," their parents would whisper, as if he were a wound too raw to acknowledge. But Malcolm saw everything. He observed how people only offered kindness when others were watching. He noted how smiles shifted the moment cameras weren't around. He saw the weight of pretense, the performance of morality. It was like watching a play that never ended, each actor clinging to their part with desperation. And he, the silent audience, bore witness. Occasionally, a few threw him coins without eye contact, tossing them like scraps to a stray dog. He never picked them up. They remained on the concrete until someone else pocketed them or the wind swept them away. On one particularly humid afternoon, a man in a tailored suit passed by and scoffed. "Disgusting," he said under his breath. "Why doesn't the city clean this up?" As if Malcolm were litter. That night, as the town settled into its routine hush, Malcolm wheeled himself behind a row of dumpsters near the alley. There, beneath a makeshift awning of tarp and cardboard, he rested. His body ached. His stomach groaned in protest. But his mind was clear. He pulled out a small notebook, the corners bent and the pages stained from weather and time. Inside were notes, scribbles, names, observations. "Fair Hope, day 49, he wrote. Then below it, "No human contact, all rejection, no eye contact, no compassion." He paused. His hand trembled slightly as he added, "Control Holden, patience intact." Then he put the notebook away, closed his eyes, and listened to the distant hum of traffic. It wasn't always like this. There was a time, not long ago, when his name commanded rooms, when his signature moved millions and his presence drew headlines. He had sat in boardrooms, flown private jets, and dined with dignitaries, but something inside him had broken. Not physically, though his body bore scars, but spiritually. The world he had known grew hollow. The people he trusted proved false. The wealth he amassed became a prison. So he left. He shed everything, name, home, identity, and went into the world to find something he couldn't buy. Truth? Was goodness still real? Was kindness extinct? Or did it still flicker somewhere beneath the ash of modern decay? Now, months into his journey, he had seen only cruelty. Each town mirrored the last. Smiles were fake. Generosity had price tags. Humanity, it seemed, was a myth. Still, he kept going. He made Fairhope his next stop, not because it was special, but because it was ordinary. And it was in the ordinary, he believed, that truth revealed itself. But even here, in its charming silence and tree-lined streets, he remained invisible among the living. His ribs showed more clearly now. His voice, once commanding, had withered to a whisper. Sometimes in the early morning before the town stirred, he caught his reflection in the glass doors of the supermarket. What stared back was not Malcolm the man, but a ghost. Hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, a face stripped of ego. Still, he waited. For what, he wasn't sure. Then, one day, the air changed. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. The pain in his belly was sharp, but he was too tired to care. He rested his head against the back of the chair, letting the morning sun warm his cheek. The supermarket doors slid open and closed in steady rhythm. Footsteps passed. Laughter echoed. Then something soft landed beside him. A paper bag, warm. He blinked, turned slightly, and saw a small figure walking away. A woman, young, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, an apron around her waist. She didn't look back. He stared at the bag. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the air. Malcolm hesitated. Then, for the first time in a long while, he reached out, took the bag in his bony fingers, and opened it. Inside was a cinnamon roll, fresh, still warm. And just beneath it, a folded napkin. Written in blue pen, in neat, curving letters, "You matter." Malcolm blinked. He read it again. The chair creaked as he leaned back, staring at the space where she had stood. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet gesture, this single roll of bread, had begun to crack something inside him that he thought was long dead. For the first time in months, he whispered a word so soft that only the wind could carry it. Hope. And so it began. The warmth of the cinnamon roll lingered in his lap far longer than its physical presence. Malcolm had eaten it slowly, each bite small, deliberate, as though afraid the moment might vanish if he rushed. He had read and reread the napkin's simple message until the ink nearly wore away beneath his thumb. You matter. 2 words, 6 letters, and a punctuation mark that somehow felt heavier than any fortune he had ever earned. The woman who had left it, he hadn't seen her face clearly, only the gentle sway of her hair and the faded green apron tied at her waist. But her presence remained imprinted on the air like perfume on an old coat. The next morning, he came earlier than usual. The sun had barely crested the horizon, but Malcolm was already there, wheeling himself slowly to his usual spot by the supermarket entrance. His fingers trembled slightly on the worn rubber handles of his wheels. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Maybe another paper bag, another message, or maybe just to see her, to make sure she was real. The early hours passed in stillness. The first wave of shoppers came and went, retirees on their morning rituals, a mother in yoga pants pulling a fussy toddler, an older man with a cane who nodded at no one. Then, just before the clock above the pharmacy kiosk struck 9, he saw her. She crossed the street from the direction of the bakery, walking with a quick but light step, her posture slightly hunched from carrying a small tote bag. The green apron was the same, though it looked fresher in daylight, and her hair was now in a braid. She didn't look at him, not directly. Instead, she moved toward the sliding doors, paused beside him for the briefest moment, and set down a paper bag on the edge of the bench near the shopping carts. She didn't say a word, and then she went inside. Malcolm stared at the bag as though it were glowing. He reached out, unwrapped the top, and found a plain bun, soft, round, glazed with a thin sheen of honey. No napkin this time, no note, but it didn't matter. The gesture had been repeated, and in its repetition something new began to form inside him. Not trust, not yet, but a question. Why? He waited for her to exit, and when she did, arms full of discounted bread loaves wrapped for the day-old shelf, she glanced at him just once. Her eyes were pale, maybe blue or green. He couldn't tell from the distance, but in that glance there was no pity, no revulsion, just something still like quiet water. He offered a tiny nod, unsure if it even registered. Over the following days, the rhythm continued. She came. She brought something, sometimes sweet, sometimes savory, once even a steaming cup of coffee with a plastic lid. Always silent, always brief. Each time she left something, she turned before he could speak, as though her purpose was not conversation, but nourishment alone. The townspeople noticed. "She's gonna catch something from him," a woman in a peach-colored tracksuit muttered to her friend as they watched from their car. "Probably tuberculosis, or worse." A man filling his truck with groceries grunted. "That freak doesn't deserve charity. What's she trying to prove, anyway?" Teenagers whispered and laughed. "Hey, maybe she's into zombies?" one joked, and another cackled until a clerk shushed them. Lily heard some of it. She pretended she didn't. She had lived in Fairhope long enough to know that kindness confused people here. They could handle charity when it came in the form of church drives and tax deductions, when the deserving poor were a safe abstraction printed in a bulletin or tucked into an envelope. But to feed the man in the wheelchair, the one who reeked of sweat and silence, that unsettled them. Her name was Lily Mae Carter. She had lived in Fairhope since she was 10, shuffled from her grandmother's home to a state shelter, and eventually back again when the old woman took pity. The bakery was her first job, and 10 years later, still her only one. She worked from dawn until mid-afternoon, kneading dough, managing the register, packaging pastries in crinkly cellophane. She didn't make much. Rent took most of it. Bills swallowed the rest. Her world was small and quiet, but it was hers. She noticed the man in the wheelchair the first week he appeared, and something in his stillness had unsettled her. It wasn't just his condition. It was the way he sat, unmoving, unblinking, as if he had once seen something that broke him and was now watching to see if the world would fix itself. She had watched others mock him, ignore him, treat him as less than human. And she had remembered being 15, barefoot on a back porch, with her ribs poking through her shirt, hoping someone would see her as more than another burden. So she brought him a bun, then another. She didn't know his name. She didn't want to pry, but she saw the way he handled the food, how carefully he opened each bag, how he never devoured anything greedily, how he always set the wrappers aside in a neat pile. He never spoke, never asked. He never reached for her or made a sound of thanks, but she didn't need him to. One morning, as she approached with a small paper-wrapped sandwich, a man leaned against a truck nearby and spat on the ground. "You feeding that thing again?" Lily stopped. She turned her head slightly. "He's not a thing," she said, voice calm. The man laughed without humor. "Might as well be. Man like that don't contribute nothing. Waste of space." She said nothing more, just walked past and placed the sandwich down. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't let them see. Malcolm had heard it all. When she walked away, he turned toward the sandwich but didn't touch it. Not yet. His chest felt heavy, not from the insult, which was common, but from the fact that she had defended him. Not publicly, not dramatically, just simply. As though the truth didn't need to be shouted to matter. The weather turned colder. One day, she brought him a pair of wool gloves. They were old and frayed, but they fit. He didn't know what to say. He had not spoken to anyone in over 3 months. His voice had become a stranger. But when she handed them to him and started to turn away, he managed a rasped, "Why?" She paused, looked back, and after a beat said, "Because if I were in that chair, I'd want some." Then she walked away. Malcolm sat for a long time after that. His hands moved slowly, tugging the gloves on. They scratched against his skin, but the warmth was real. That night, when he returned to his makeshift corner behind the dumpsters, he pulled out the notebook again. The paper was soft from use, the pen nearly dry. He wrote slowly, "Fairhope, day 56. Kindness observed, consistent. No gain expected. Pattern continues. Subject, Lily Mae Carter, age approx, mid-20s, occupation bakery. Notes, defends target against hostility, offers food daily, provided gloves, spoke kindly, no cameras, no audience. Genuine." He circled the last word 3 times. The next day, he arrived early again. She came, as always, holding a paper bag. This time she sat down on the bench beside him, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel her presence. "I brought tea," she said simply, holding out a thermos. "It's got honey." He took it. Their fingers didn't touch. He held the thermos like it was made of glass. Lily looked ahead, not at him. "You've got eyes that notice things," she said, almost to herself. I can tell." He didn't answer. "People like that don't usually end up in chairs outside grocery stores," she added. "You used to be somebody." That struck him harder than any insult ever had, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate and kind. He turned to her slowly. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He simply nodded once with all the gravity he could muster. She stood. "Well," she said, brushing off her apron, "you still are." Then she walked away. And Malcolm, for the first time since leaving his world behind, felt something stir in his chest that resembled purpose. The question that had driven him for months, whether goodness still existed, was no longer a question. It was now a fragile, flickering truth. And her name was Lily. The wind had turned sharper, curling down the narrow streets and weaving through the bare branches that lined the edges of Fairhope. Winter wasn't here yet, but it crept closer each morning, fogging up shop windows and leaving a trace of frost on the grass. Malcolm felt it deep in his bones, but he never flinched. Cold didn't bother him the way it once did. It was familiar now, a companion, a constant. But in the middle of the bitterness, a strange warmth had begun to flicker through his days. A warmth that came not from the sun, nor from the gloves wrapped tightly around his frail fingers, but from the quiet rhythm of Lily's presence. She came almost every morning now. Sometimes she brought tea, sometimes a sandwich, sometimes a scone wrapped in wax paper. Other days it was nothing more than a soft smile or a few minutes sitting beside him. They rarely spoke. Words weren't necessary. In fact, Malcolm often found that her silence was more comforting than the noise of 100 empty conversations he'd had in his past life. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. But she noticed things, and that, he was coming to understand, was rarer than gold. It was in the way she glanced at the broken wheel on his chair, and the next day brought a small bottle of oil. The way she left him an old paperback on a rainy morning, tucked inside a plastic bag to keep it dry. It was a collection of essays, nothing dramatic, just something she thought he might like. He did. He read each page slowly, savoring the clean paper, the thoughtful margin notes left by a previous reader. Lily never mentioned the book again. She just smiled the next day when she saw that he still carried it in the basket on the back of his chair. She noticed, and he noticed that she noticed. And that changed everything. Fairhope, however, remained the same. People still watched them from a distance. Whispers followed Lily more openly now. In the bakery, customers made offhand remarks, some gentle, others laced with mockery. "That girl's got a savior complex," one woman muttered, "feeding that thing like it's a stray dog." Another man shook his head as he picked up a loaf of sourdough. "He's probably dangerous. Could be anyone under that mess. She'll learn." Lily heard it all. She heard it with the same quiet ears she'd used to survive her own childhood. She didn't fight back with words. She didn't explain herself. She simply kept doing what she knew was right. And Malcolm, though he said little, began to see her not just as kind, but as brave. Braver than the men he'd once known who wore medals on their chests or ordered boardrooms into silence. She faced ridicule for nothing more than extending her hand. And she did it without complaint. It was a Tuesday when Lily left him something different. A pen and a folded piece of blank paper. He looked at her, puzzled, as she handed them over. "You've got thoughts," she said, eyes meeting his for the first time that day. "Write some down." Then she was gone, the bell above the bakery door jingling softly behind her. Malcolm stared at the paper for a long time. His fingers were stiff and the muscles in his arms weak, but he managed to uncap the pen. He didn't write a letter or a confession. He wrote a formula. It was instinctive, reflexive even. The curve of letters, the arrangement of numbers, a differential equation involving 3 variables. Complex, elegant, a piece of the mind he'd once used every day, now scribbled onto a bakery napkin. He folded it and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, unsure why he'd written it at all. The next morning, Lily handed him a fresh bun and sat beside him without a word. They watched the parking lot fill and empty. The light shifted. Somewhere across the street, a dog barked. Then she spoke. "You used to be someone important." He didn't answer. "You still are," she added softly. That night, Malcolm returned to his corner behind the dumpsters and stared at the stars peeking through the gaps in the clouded sky. He couldn't sleep. For the first time in months, he didn't want to. His mind was restless, alive. He pulled out his notebook and began to write. Not notes about people, not observations, but fragments of memory, equations, words from languages he hadn't used in years. Snippets of lectures, concepts for designs, names of companies, his companies. He filled 3 pages before the pen gave out. The next day, something shifted. Lily arrived as usual, a muffin in her hand, but this time she hesitated before approaching. Malcolm could see the crease in her brow, the way her eyes darted toward the storefront where a group of teenage boys stood watching. They were laughing. Loudly. One of them called out, "Hey, Lily, gonna marry him next? You can be the breadwinner, and he can just drool on your couch." She didn't respond. She simply walked forward, placed the muffin in Malcolm's lap, and stood there. Malcolm, slowly and deliberately, turned his head to the group. He said nothing, but the way he looked at them, calm, unflinching, direct, was enough to make the boys quiet. They shuffled awkwardly, then disappeared into the store. Lily exhaled. "I'm sorry," she said. Malcolm spoke for the first time in days. "You don't need to be." His voice was low, rasped from disuse, but firm. She sat beside him, her shoulders tense. "I know you're not who they think you are," she said. "But I also know that it doesn't matter who you were. You're still someone worth kindness." Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words settle. "You're the first person who's seen me in a long time," he replied. She smiled faintly. "I think you see more than most." Over the following weeks, Malcolm began to change. Not physically. His body remained frail, his skin stretched, his wheelchair still tilted, but something in his posture shifted. He sat taller. He looked people in the eye. He responded when spoken to. Slowly, he allowed himself to return to the world, not as the man he once was, but as the man who had emerged through the fire. Lily noticed it all. She said little, but she smiled more often. They didn't need to speak much anymore. There was a rhythm between them now, a silent understanding forged by bread, by tea, by quiet mornings shared in the chill. Still, Malcolm kept his secret. He didn't tell her who he had been, what he owned, what he built, what he lost. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't want that truth to pollute what they had. He had tested many cities. He had met hundreds of people, and in each place he had waited to be seen. But only here, with her, did someone truly look. The notebook grew heavier with ink. Fairhope, Day 71. Pattern confirmed. Target displays sustained empathy across extended timeline. No signs of self-interest or social reward seeking. Subject analysis. Moral authenticity evident. Environmental hostility resisted. No prompting required. Subject likely to continue behavior without reward. Evaluation complete. Anomaly located. He tapped the edge of the page with his pen. Then he closed the notebook. The experiment, as he had designed it, was nearly over, but something inside him, a new, unfamiliar whisper, suggested that this time he didn't want to leave. It was a morning like so many others. Pale sunlight spilled across the brick walls of the bakery, and a thin layer of frost clung to the edges of the parking lot. The streets of Fairhope had begun to stir, though not yet in full. Lily's footsteps were soft against the pavement, her breath visible in the cold air as she walked the familiar path to the supermarket with a warm paper bag cradled in her hands. It held a slice of banana bread, slightly overcooked, the crust darker than usual, but it still smelled good. She had wrapped it twice in parchment paper, more out of habit than necessity, her mind already on the man who would receive it. She crossed the lot, eyes scanning the usual corner, but the space was empty. The shopping carts sat in their racks undisturbed. A pigeon pecked aimlessly near a gum-stained curb. The rusted signpost where Malcolm often parked his broken wheelchair leaned slightly to one side, but there was no wheelchair, no thin frame hunched over a lap, no motionless figure with quiet eyes watching the world pass. He was gone. Lily stopped in place. Her arms remained halfway raised, the bag clutched tightly as if the warmth inside could draw him out of hiding. She blinked and looked again. Still nothing. For a few seconds, she told herself he must be late. Maybe he'd stayed somewhere warmer the night before. Maybe his chair had broken down farther away and he was struggling to get here. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the other corners of the lot, the alleyway behind the bakery, the shadows near the pharmacy. But there was only the ordinary hum of a town beginning its day. No sign of Malcolm. She waited. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Customers came and went, offering her curious glances. A few regulars smiled politely. One of the bakery's part-time drivers honked and waved. She didn't wave back. By the time the clock struck 9, Lily's heart had started to beat faster, not with fear exactly, but with a cold dread that something was wrong. Malcolm had never missed a morning, not since she began leaving him food, not even on the day it snowed before Thanksgiving when the roads were slick and even the bakery opened late. He had been there that day, wrapped in a blanket, eyes red from the cold, but present. Now he was absent. She returned to the bakery, the bread still in her hand. She placed it on the counter, then leaned against the wall in the back and stared at the floor. Her co-worker glanced at her, concerned, but Lily just shook her head. "I'm fine," she said too quickly. The next morning, he was still gone. Lily arrived earlier than usual, heart tight in her chest. She scanned the streets again, even walked 2 blocks out of her way. She peeked behind the supermarket, near the row of dumpsters where he sometimes disappeared after dusk, but the space was empty. A torn plastic tarp fluttered in the wind. A crumpled soda can rolled across the pavement. Nothing else. That day, she asked. First, she approached a security guard stationed near the pharmacy entrance. He was a young man, broad-shouldered with a patchy beard and suspicious eyes. When she asked if he'd seen the man in the wheelchair, he shrugged. "The skeleton guy?" he said, not unkindly, just casually. "Haven't seen him in a couple days. Maybe he moved on." "Moved on where?" The guard gave a small, helpless smile. "They don't exactly leave forwarding addresses." Lily's lips pressed into a line. She turned away. Next, she stopped by the police substation, a cramped annex attached to the fire department with a coffee machine that always sputtered and blinked out of order. The officer behind the glass window looked bored. "Do you have any reports of an unhoused man, older, dark-skinned, in a wheelchair, disappearing?" she asked. The officer squinted. "You mean the guy that hangs around the food mart?" "Yes, his name is Malcolm, I think. No one filed anything. We don't keep track unless someone calls it in." "Well, I'm calling it in now." He raised an eyebrow, slightly amused. "Is he family?" "No." "Friend?" Lily hesitated. "No, but he matters." The officer tapped on his keyboard with 2 fingers. "I'll make a note. You can leave your name if you want." She did. It didn't help. Another day passed, then another. The mornings became colder. The first snow flurries appeared in the forecast, and the space where Malcolm once sat remained vacant. People began to forget. A child asked his mother, "Where's the wheelchair man?" And she replied, "Maybe he went to sleep somewhere warm." A pair of high school girls, seeing Lily pause again at the empty spot, whispered behind cupped hands. One clerk at the bakery joked that she should put out a missing persons poster for her mystery boyfriend. Lily laughed weakly, but the laughter caught in her throat. By the end of the week, she could no longer eat properly. Every morning, she prepared something, just in case, and every morning she carried it with her. And every morning she brought it back. She tried calling hospitals, shelters, even the nearest hospice facility in the next county. No one had any record of a man matching Malcolm's description. She began to have dreams. In them, he was walking, not in a wheelchair, walking, tall and proud, down an endless street that twisted into a blur. She called after him, but he never turned. His face was shadowed. His coat flapped in the wind. Sometimes she saw him standing in the alleyway, watching her, eyes sad and knowing. Once, she dreamed he was gone entirely, and the bench where he used to sit was covered in withered flowers. Then, on the 6th morning of his absence, she found something at the front door of her apartment. It was a sealed envelope. No name, no stamp. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, the edges slightly curled from the cold. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Inside was a single sheet, folded once. There were no introductions, no explanations, just a message written in neat black ink. "Come to the Glen Haven Hotel at 4 p.m. Don't tell anyone. From a friend." Lily read it 3 times. Her first instinct was confusion. The Glen Haven Hotel was in the city, over an hour away by bus. She had never been there. She'd never even had a reason to pass by. It was one of those places spoken of in vague tones by people who could afford valet parking and room service. She had once seen a photo of its lobby in a magazine at the laundromat. Gold fixtures, a chandelier the size of a car. The second instinct was fear. Who had written this? Why the secrecy? Was it a trick? But something in her heart stirred, something quiet and sure. The handwriting, the formality, the simple signature, it all pointed in one direction. Malcolm. It had to be him. She stared out the window at the pale morning light stretching across the rooftops. The town seemed even smaller from up here. The buildings too close, the air too quiet. She had never left Fairhope. Not really. Not like this. But if he was out there, if there was any chance, she had to go. At exactly 3:30, Lily stood in front of her small apartment door, coat buttoned, scarf tight, her bag slung over one shoulder. She locked the door behind her, took a deep breath, and walked down the steps into the gray afternoon. The bus ride to the city was long and slow. Traffic clogged the freeway just outside the outer neighborhoods, and the clouds thickened overhead. Lily sat by the window, staring out at the blur of concrete and signs, her thoughts spinning. Her hands never stopped clutching the envelope. When the bus finally pulled up to the curb near the Glen Haven Hotel, she stepped off and froze. The building was more enormous than she imagined. Glass walls reflected the slate sky. Doormen in dark suits opened polished gold doors for guests whose shoes cost more than her monthly rent. Everything was clean, orderly, expensive. It was a world far from Fairhope, far from her bakery counter and the cracked sidewalks of home. She took a step forward, then another. A man in a dark suit with an earpiece greeted her at the entrance. "Miss Carter?" he asked, as though he had known she would arrive. She nodded, too stunned to question it. "Please, come with me." They walked through the massive lobby. A grand staircase curved upward beneath a chandelier so intricate it seemed to float. Polished floors reflected everything like water. The air smelled like citrus and leather. He led her down a hallway, past closed doors until they reached one made of deep cherry wood. He paused. "He's waiting inside," he said. Lily's breath caught. She placed her hand on the doorknob, heart thudding. Then, slowly, she turned it. The door opened. And there he was. The room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that came from silence alone, but the kind that settled deep, that wrapped itself around the bones and pressed gently against the heart. Lily stood in the doorway, one hand still resting on the polished handle, the other trembling slightly by her side. Her breath caught in her throat, suspended somewhere between disbelief and awe. Her eyes swept the room once. Tall windows with sheer white curtains, a heavy wooden desk near the corner, and in the center, a man in a wheelchair. For a moment, her mind refused to connect the man before her with the man she had known. The contrast was too sharp. The figure in the chair now sat upright, back straight, clothed in a crisp white shirt with gold cufflinks and tailored trousers that fell perfectly over his legs. His shoes were polished, his hair trimmed, his face freshly shaved. Even the wheelchair was different, sleek, modern, without a hint of rust or wear. But the eyes were the same, deep, dark, and still. He didn't speak at first. He only watched her, a soft smile forming slowly as if carved from stone. "Lily," he said at last, his voice warm, steady, and fuller than she remembered. "Thank you for coming." She blinked, her voice caught behind the storm of questions pressing against her throat. "You're—" she began, then faltered. "You look different," he offered. She nodded slowly, stepping farther into the room, the door clicking softly shut behind her. "You were gone," she whispered. "I had to be. You didn't tell me. I couldn't." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. It carried understanding, even if it was still wrapped in confusion. She sat down slowly on the edge of a wide armchair across from him. Her eyes moved over the room again. Everything was elegant, expensive, and immaculate. A far cry from the world of cracked sidewalks and grocery bags, and yet he didn't look uncomfortable in it. If anything, he looked like he belonged. "You're not who I thought you were," she said quietly. "I'm not who anyone thought I was." He paused as if weighing each word carefully before continuing. "My name is Malcolm Elijah Ward. I was the founder and CEO of a technology firm called Ward Solutions. We developed artificial intelligence systems, medical diagnostic tools, and energy efficiency software. At one point, I employed over 5,000 people. I was in talks to build research facilities in 3 countries. I was invited to summits, met presidents, signed billion-dollar deals." He let that settle, watching her carefully. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. "I had everything," he continued. And yet none of it felt real anymore. Not after the people closest to me sold out my trust. A partner I treated like a brother funneled money out of our own charitable foundation. Another tried to push me out of my own company. The people I thought were family vanished the moment the spotlight dimmed. He looked down briefly, then back up. I began to ask myself, who would I be if I lost everything? Who would stand beside me if I had nothing to offer? Would anyone see me if I had no name, no title, no power? Lily stared, unmoving. So I walked away, he said simply, sold the company, disappeared from the news, took what money I had left and used it to fund a project I called The Mirror. A personal test. I went city to city, town to town, living on the street, in shelters, sometimes under nothing but a roof of tarp. I wanted to observe, not just the cruelty, but the kindness that still exists in the world. I needed to see if humanity was still capable of compassion when there was nothing to gain. He leaned forward slightly in his chair. You were the only one who passed. Lily's mouth parted, but no words came. You didn't know me. You didn't expect anything. You didn't give out of guilt or ego. You gave because it was right, because it was kind. You saw a man sitting alone in the cold and decided he mattered. He reached into the side of his chair and pulled out a small cloth pouch. From it, he withdrew a folded napkin. Her breath caught. He unfolded it and held it up. It was her handwriting. The first note. You matter. I carried this with me every day after you gave it to me, he said. Even when the rain soaked through my jacket. Even when the nights felt longer than I thought I could bear. This little piece of truth reminded me that I hadn't gone mad. That somewhere in the world, someone still believed in goodness. Tears welled in her eyes. She lowered her head, overwhelmed. I don't understand, she said softly. I'm just a girl from a bakery. He smiled, placing the napkin back into the pouch. No, he said, you're the kind of person the world needs more of, and people like you deserve more than survival. He turned slightly in his chair, motioning toward a folder resting on the desk nearby. With a nod, an assistant stepped in from a side room. She hadn't even noticed there was another door, and handed the folder to Lily. Inside were documents, ownership papers, legal filings, design blueprints. At the top of the first page was a logo, a stylized heart wrapped in a circle. Underneath, bold letters read, Lily's Heart, a place for all. She looked up, stunned. I bought a property, he said, his tone still gentle but resolute. In the city, but close enough to Fairhope that you can live wherever you like. It's a cafe, a bakery, a community kitchen, and something more. You'll manage it. Staff will be hired. You'll have full creative control. It's yours. She shook her head. I don't know how to run something like this. You know how to care, he replied. The rest we can teach. She looked down at the papers again, as if they might vanish. You're giving me a building? I'm giving you a platform, a space to do what you already do best. Feed people, notice people, remind them they matter. A tear slid down her cheek. I don't deserve this, she whispered. You earned it, he said, long before you even knew my name. She sat in silence for a long while, hands resting on the folder, eyes unfocused. The world around her felt distant, dreamlike. She had spent so long moving quietly, surviving humbly, that the thought of ownership, of purpose beyond survival, felt like fiction. Why me? She asked at last. Because I needed to find someone who would give without knowing they'd receive, he said. I needed to believe people like you still existed. She looked up at him, truly seeing him now, not as the fragile figure in the broken wheelchair, not as the billionaire recluse, but as a man who had broken himself open just to test whether the world still had a soul. And she had answered that question without even knowing it. They sat there together in the quiet, no more words needed for the moment. Just two people bound by an invisible thread, pulled together by simple acts in a world that often forgot how powerful simplicity could be. Outside the hotel windows, the wind had stilled. The streets below glimmered with the soft sheen of winter light. Somewhere in the distance, car horns blared and people moved through their busy lives, unaware that, in one quiet room, a decision had been made that would ripple far beyond the moment. Lily stood slowly, tucking the folder beneath her arm. Her heart was still racing, but a calm had begun to settle in its place. "Thank you," she said. The words were soft but full. Malcolm nodded. "No," he replied. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." As she turned to go, he called gently after her. "Lily?" She paused. "There's more I want to show you, if you're ready." She turned back toward him. "I'm ready," she said, and this time it was her voice that held the steadiness. The car was unlike anything Lily had ever ridden in. It was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, the kind of quiet that came from luxury so refined that it erased even the sound of its own engine. She sat in the back seat beside Malcolm, the smooth leather warm beneath her despite the chill outside. The windows were tinted, but not so dark that she couldn't make out the blur of the city as it passed. Steel buildings, polished sidewalks, people walking with quick purpose. She kept glancing at Malcolm, unsure if this was all still real. His posture was as composed as before, his suit uncreased, his expression calm, but something in his eyes had changed since they left the hotel. There was light there now, not bright or boastful, but steady, like a flame that had waited too long to burn. She hadn't asked where they were going. He hadn't said. When he had asked if she was ready, she'd answered without hesitation. Something in her had known that whatever he wanted to show her wasn't going to be about money or buildings alone. This was deeper. Personal. The car turned off the main road after half an hour and began to wind through a quieter part of the city. The sidewalks widened. The buildings grew further apart, more spaced out, and their glass fronts gave way to gardens and clean brick exteriors. Street lamps stood evenly spaced, casting soft gold glows on trimmed hedges and quiet storefronts. There was a strange peace here, an air of order and intention. Then she saw it. 5 black SUVs were already parked along the curb, their engines off, each attended by a man in a black suit and earpiece. The building they flanked stood wide and tall, but it wasn't intimidating. It was beautiful. More beautiful than she could have imagined. A broad structure with sweeping windows that caught the light like water. Its front steps were lined with planters filled with seasonal blooms, and soft jazz drifted from outdoor speakers near the entryway. On the tall white wall above the double doors was a sign, elegant, understated, yet impossible to miss. Lily's Heart, a place for all. She gasped. It wasn't just the name. It wasn't just that her name was there, written in a font that felt warm and timeless. It was everything. The building radiated welcome. Every detail had been considered, every corner polished, every inch inviting. And it bore her name. Her name. The car door opened. Malcolm extended a hand, not as a billionaire or benefactor, but simply as a man offering steadiness. She took it. They walked together across the pavement. Cameras clicked in the distance, but no crowd had gathered. Malcolm had kept this moment private. This unveiling wasn't for the world. It was for her. Inside, the space was even more extraordinary. The lobby was filled with golden light from a series of high-set windows. The floor gleamed with polished wood inlaid with darker grains and delicate patterns. The walls held artwork that felt hand-picked, not for value, but for meaning. Images of open hands, bread being broken, faces smiling beneath sunbeams. There was no sterile luxury here. Everything pulsed with life. Staff stood waiting just inside. Chefs in crisp uniforms, front desk managers in tailored vests, a head baker in a soft pink apron. They smiled as she entered, and one woman stepped forward, a set of keys resting on a satin cushion. "For you, Miss Carter," she said. "Welcome home." Lily stared at the keys for a moment before taking them. Her hand trembled slightly. It's too much," she said, voice unsteady. "This can't be for me." "It is," Malcolm replied, his voice unwavering, "and it's not too much. It's just right." She walked further in, each step revealing more. There was a main cafe space with long windows looking out over a modest courtyard. The tables were made of dark walnut, each paired with cushioned chairs that invited long conversations. One wall was lined with bookshelves, cookbooks, poetry collections, even children's picture books, beside a small stage and a piano. Toward the back, an open kitchen gleamed with stainless steel counters and rows of professional-grade appliances. Behind that, a pantry larger than any she'd seen outside a grocery store. Everything was organized, labeled, waiting. There were conference rooms, break rooms, and a small office upstairs that bore her name on the glass. Lily Carter, Director. She stood before the door for a long time, unable to move. Her picture was framed beside it, a photo of her from the bakery, flower on her cheek, smile lopsided and tired. Someone had found it. Someone had remembered. "I didn't do anything to deserve this," she whispered again, mostly to herself. Malcolm stood beside her, arms folded gently behind his back. "That's where you're wrong," he said. "You did something almost no one does anymore. You were kind, not publicly, not performatively. You helped a stranger when you thought no one was watching. You gave food, dignity, and hope, and you never asked for anything in return." She opened the office door and stepped inside. The room was modest but filled with sunlight. A wide desk faced a window that looked out over the street. On the corner of the desk sat a vase of wildflowers and a folder containing a welcome letter, contracts, operational budgets, and a handwritten note from Malcolm. She picked it up, unfolding the note with trembling fingers. "Lily, you saw me when I was invisible. You fed me when I was forgotten. Let this place feed others as you fed me, with grace, with joy, and with open hands. Your kindness didn't just change my life. It restored my faith in people. This is my way of saying thank you. M." She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. For a long moment, she simply breathed. Later that afternoon, after the staff had been introduced and the building toured, Malcolm led her back downstairs. Outside, the sun had begun to dip behind the skyline, painting the air in golds and violets. The SUVs were still waiting, but Lily didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. She felt steady, grounded. "There's one more thing," Malcolm said quietly. She looked at him, brows lifting slightly. He nodded to a small plaque affixed beside the entry doors. She hadn't noticed it before. Together they walked toward it. It read, "Dedicated to the forgotten. To the ones passed by, looked over, and stepped around. May they find here what the world denied them: dignity, care, and a place at the table." Below it, in smaller letters, "Inspired by the generosity of Lily Mae Carter, who believed a man in a wheelchair deserved to eat with dignity. May her example remind us that kindness, quiet, unassuming, and freely given, is the greatest strength of all." Lily reached up and touched the edge of the plaque, fingertips brushing over the cool metal. Tears came again, not from sadness, but from the impossible weight of grace. She looked at Malcolm, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw him not as a man in disguise, not as a billionaire with a purpose, but as someone who had also been broken once, who had chosen not to stay broken, who had allowed her to become part of his healing. "What now?" she asked softly. "Now," he said, "you run this place, you hire who you believe in, you feed those who need it, you teach others to see." She nodded, and she understood. The reward wasn't the building. It wasn't the staff, or the kitchen, or even the office with her name on the door. The real reward was the permission to act on what she had always known, that love, in its smallest gestures, could transform everything. That night, after Malcolm had gone and the staff had left her alone with her thoughts, Lily stood outside beneath the stars. The sign above the doors glowed softly, casting its name into the cool evening air. She looked up at it one last time before heading inside to begin the work. Her work. Kindness had brought her here. Now it was her turn to let it lead others home. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of Lily's heart, casting golden shapes across the polished floors and tabletops. Outside, the city still stirred to life in its usual rhythm. Cars groaning through intersections, feet hurrying along sidewalks, vendors arranging crates of produce. But inside the building, a gentler pace had taken hold. The air smelled of warm bread and cinnamon, and somewhere in the kitchen, the soft clatter of metal trays echoed alongside quiet laughter. Music played from a speaker near the front, a gentle jazz tune that seemed to breathe with the heartbeat of the place. Lily stood at the window of her second-floor office, her fingers curled around a ceramic mug filled with hot coffee. The office was tidy, the air fresh, the surface of her desk clean and warm from the sun. On the shelf behind her sat a framed copy of Malcolm's note, along with the small pouch that still held her napkin, the one she had given him so long ago, now preserved like a relic. She had never touched it since the day he'd returned it, never unfolded it again. She didn't need to. She knew every curve of the ink by heart. It had been 6 months since the day 6 months since Malcolm handed her the keys to something she hadn't even dared to imagine. And yet, in that time, the building had become more than a restaurant, more than a business. It had become a refuge, a haven, a place where names didn't matter as much as stories, where eyes met across tables and hands shared plates without shame. Every morning, Lily arrived before the staff. She opened the back doors herself, turned on the lights, walked the length of the kitchen and pantry and front dining area. She touched every space, not out of obligation, but as ritual, a reminder that all of it was real. The building no longer intimidated her. It felt like a familiar coat, well-worn, comfortable, shaped by her hands. And though she no longer served customers directly, she was everywhere, consulting with the chef about new menu items, helping the cleaning crew stack chairs at night, hugging the dishwasher who showed up early to finish a GED workbook in the break room. She learned everyone's names. She learned their stories. And she made sure no one left without a thank you. But most important of all, she never forgot. She never forgot the mornings in Fairhope, the cold bench, the silence, the way people averted their eyes. She never forgot Malcolm hunched in his chair, skin stretched over bone, dignity buried beneath dirt and disrepair. She never forgot how the world could walk past someone as if they were furniture, and how easy it had been for her to stop, to offer bread, to sit beside him, to see. And now, because she had seen him, others were being seen. Lily's Heart had launched its outreach program 2 months ago. Every Friday morning, a large white van with the restaurant's logo and a bright red heart on the side would park in front of the building. Volunteers loaded trays of hot meals into its insulated compartments: stewed vegetables, seasoned rice, freshly baked rolls, fruit cups, bottled water, sometimes a sweet treat tucked into a paper bag with a handwritten note. The van visited bus stops, underpasses, tent communities, and forgotten corners of the city that didn't appear on tourist maps. People lined up with quiet faces and empty hands. Some smiled. Some didn't. Some muttered thanks, others simply nodded. But Lily was there every week. She didn't send managers or hide behind donations. She wore a hairnet and gloves and passed out food herself. She greeted every person like a guest. She knelt to speak to children. She handed out wool socks and extra napkins, and sometimes just a warm look when there were no words to offer. That Friday was no different. By 10 o'clock, the van was filled. The staff waved her off as she climbed into the passenger seat beside Jameson, one of her drivers, a former teacher who had lost his job during the recession. He whistled softly as he backed onto the street. "East Side first, ma'am?" he asked. She nodded, adjusting the clipboard on her lap. "Yes, then over by the market bridge." They drove in silence for a while. The city unfolded in soft grays and browns, the buildings older, more worn. Graffiti marked the edges of brick walls. A row of boarded windows passed in a blur. Lily watched everything, her eyes never idle. Their first stop was beneath an old train trestle. A cluster of makeshift tents clung together like survivors in a storm. As they approached, figures stirred. A man in a yellow coat lifted his head. A woman with graying hair emerged from a tent and squinted toward the van. Lily stepped out with her clipboard and called, "We brought breakfast. Come eat." They came slowly, warily. The new ones always did. She handed out meal after meal, her gloves warming from the trays. "Here you go, love," she murmured to a young woman. "Stay warm today." "Good to see you again," she told a man with a scarred chin who remembered her name but never used it. A toddler clung to his mother's coat, and Lily knelt to his level. "Would you like a banana muffin, sweetheart?" By the time they reached the Bridge District, the trays were half empty. They stopped in a small lot beside a chain-link fence. Across the street, people began to gather, drawn by word of mouth, by routine, by hunger. Among them, an older woman approached slowly. Her coat was too big for her frame. Her shoes had duct tape around the toes. Her fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the meal. But before turning away, she looked directly at Lily and asked, "Why do you do this?" Lily didn't hesitate. She touched her chest lightly, right above her heart. "Because kindness brought me here," she said simply, "so I have to send it back out again." The woman blinked, eyes glassy. She nodded once, then walked away. Jameson leaned out the van window and said, "I swear, one day you're going to break me." Lily smiled. "Only if you let me." That afternoon, after they returned to the restaurant and the staff helped unpack the van, Lily made her way upstairs to her office. The building bustled below. Customers laughing over pastries, kitchen staff singing along to a song on the radio, the espresso machine hissing in rhythm with clinking dishes. She sat behind her desk and opened her journal, the same kind she had used for years. Inside were notes from each week's outreach: what meals worked best, which locations had the greatest need, names of people to remember. But today, instead of writing numbers or updates, She turned to a fresh page and wrote a name. Malcolm. She stared at it for a while, then beneath it wrote, "He gave me the tools, I'm giving them to others, and they'll give them to more. Kindness never dies. It multiplies." The door knocked gently. It was Maya, one of her assistant managers. "There's a guest here asking for you." "Name?" Lily asked. "He said to tell you it's the man who once couldn't stand." Lily's heart jumped. She stood and followed Maya downstairs, her steps faster than usual. He was waiting in the back garden. The small courtyard behind the restaurant had been designed as a quiet space. Tables beneath trees, benches beside raised flower beds, a small water fountain burbling gently in the corner. Malcolm sat near the edge, not in a wheelchair, but in a wooden chair with arms, wearing a dark overcoat and scarf. His posture was strong, his eyes calm. He stood when he saw her. Not quickly, not for show, but deliberately. They didn't speak for a moment. They just looked at each other, the way they had all those months ago across a tray of tea and a folded napkin. "You look well," he said. "So do you." She joined him on the bench. "They tell me your name is on 100 mouths in this city now," he said, glancing toward the building. "People say you feed with more than food." "I had a good teacher," she replied. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fountain. Then Malcolm said, "I wanted to thank you, not just for what you gave me then, but for what you've done since. I gave you a building. You gave it a soul." Lily's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "It was never about the building," she said. "No," he agreed. "It was about a girl who gave a starving man a cinnamon roll without expecting anything in return." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her something wrapped in velvet. She opened it slowly. Inside was a gold pin shaped like an open hand holding a heart. "It's a symbol I designed," he said, "for a foundation I'm building, a global initiative. I want to help communities replicate what you've done here. But I want the emblem to come from you, from this place." She looked down at the pin, the design simple and unmistakable. "And I want to name the program after you." She shook her head, breath unsteady. "I don't need that." "I know," he said. "That's why you deserve it." They sat there until the sun dipped low and the sky turned a dusky purple. And when he left, she didn't watch him go with sadness. She watched with certainty, because she knew he'd never really left, not her life, not this work, not the message that had started everything. The next morning, as she prepared for another food run, one of her young volunteers asked her a question. "Miss Lily," he said, struggling to tie an apron behind his back, "why do you always come out with us? You could just stay here. You're the boss." She smiled, knelt, and helped him with the knot. "Because once, someone made me feel like I mattered," she said. And that was reason enough. In a world often too busy to notice, Lily chose to see. And in being seen, kindness never died. It only grew. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Feel free to share this video with someone who might need it today. And if you're ready for another powerful story, check out the next one waiting for you on the channel.